All right, now I'm going to review the Mad Scientist Club Complete Collection. This is a collection of books. The original Mad Scientist Club book, which this is the cover of, had it was about a group of 7 teenage boys who would use science to have adventures. Uh, Jeff was the president of the club because they met in his barn. Henry was the smartest one. Uh, Freddie and Dinky were like your everyman types. Um, they were not as smart as the others, and Freddie was fat. Dinky was skinny. Homer's father owned the hardware store, and there's Mortimer, and Charlie was hardly ever mentioned by name. The stories are being told as a first person thing. I saw this, I went there, that sort of thing. And so very rarely do one of the other characters call him by name, but he's the narrator. So the original book was a series of short stories that were originally published in magazines like Boy's Life. And then there was another book of short stories called The New Adventures of the Mad Scientist Club. And then I found out more recently, I read these when I was 10 and 11, and I loved them. But more recently, I found out that he wrote a couple of novels about these guys. The first one was a prequel novel. So let's just go through it a little bit. And the second one is a last adventures of them. Now, these guys, there was always mention of a guy named Harmon Muldoon, Freddie's cousin. And Harmon used to be a member of the club, but he was kicked out for conduct unbecoming a scientist. And so he had a rival gang that would sometimes clash with the mad scientists. So I'm going to show you it. This is, here they are with the mayor and the police chief, Mayor Scragg. So there is a table of contents here. The Big Kerplop is the prequel novel, and The Big Chunk of Ice is the sequel. So, but it doesn't have a table of contents for the story. So first is the Mad Scientist Club, which there's a story where they fake a sea monster, and then there's one where they find a dinosaur egg and try to hatch it. Okay, here they are. And the novels were illustrated by the same person who did the short stories, which I was grateful for. The Secret of the Old Cannon is about how they broke into an old Civil War cannon that was plugged up with cement, and then had some adventures based on that. The Unidentified Flying Man of Mammoth Falls is where I'll find a picture. Anyway, they took a mannequin and had it's kind of hard to describe what they did with this mannequin, but it was a great adventure. The Great Gas Bag Race is where they had a balloon race. And Night Rescues, where they rescued an Air Force pilot who had crashed. Now, The New Adventures of the Mad Scientist Club was a sequel. And so there's a story about them foiling a bank robbery. And the Cool Cavern is where they bought an old midget submarine and tried to refurbish it. The Big Chief Rainmaker is about, during a drought, they tried to make it rain by shooting rockets with nitrous silver iodine. I forget what they call that stuff, but yeah, the silver. And the Flying Sorcerer is where they faked a UFO. So it's like the opposite of Scooby-Doo. The Scooby Gang would have liked to have busted these guys, except they weren't doing it for money. They were just doing it for fun. Now, the great confrontation is where Harmon Muldoon's gang kidnapped Freddie and Dinky and held them for ransom. So the gang war is getting tough. So after that is The Big Kerplop. This is a prequel to the first two books about how they got together. And, there's some mysteries about this. How did Harmon Muldoon go from being a member to being out? What horrible thing did he do that got him kicked out? So when the book opens, Jeff and Charlie and Harmon are fishing, and Jeff and Charlie are bullying Harmon. And as the story progresses, Harmon does some things that are not the smartest, but it wasn't a big betrayal or anything. And the final incident where he got kicked out, Jeff told him he was kicked out because he and some other kids were throwing things at each other. Not members of the Mad Science Club, just some other kids. And he thought it was too childish. And that was the big betrayal that made him get kicked out and made him form another gang that was rival to theirs. Now, the next one is The Big Ice Chunk, The Big Chunk of Ice. And this novel, they get in a blimp and they go to Austria. And most of the story takes place not in Mammoth Falls, where all the other adventures take place, but in Austria. And I didn't enjoy these stories as much as I did when I was 10, but I did enjoy them. But the Big Kerplop introduced this character named Dr. Stradivarius, who's supposedly a scientist, but based on his behavior in this book, where he has a bigger role, he's a really horrible scientist. Doesn't apply the scientific method at all. And so I had trouble finishing this. I got bogged down, and it took a global pandemic to make me finish this thing. So, all in all, I would say this is a good book. It's worth getting, especially if you're an adolescent. You will love these stories. Even though the science is 50 years out of date, it's still reasonable. It doesn't contradict what we know is possible. So it's still a great book. You'll enjoy the first half of it, but the novels, not so much.